This is part 15 of the Craftsman 6-inch joiner rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 14, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will complete the assembly of the joiner. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Now that the joiner is mostly assembled, we're going to go ahead and install that on the pedestal tool stand. This is pretty straightforward. Can't go on but one way. 3 bolts that hold it in place. However, I probably should have gone ahead and installed the power panel before installing the joiner. It would have been easier when it comes to installing that power panel. But hey, it's the first time I ever worked on one of these. So once we got that all tightened down, next, we're going to make some adjustments to the depth of cut gauge. We're just going to set it at 0 while the tables are relatively flush. Next, we're going to be adjusting the rear table. That's the one on the left. So we've got the front table already cinched down, and so we need to remove these 3 center screws, or loosen them at least, and then we can get this table level by turning those threaded studs that are in there. Once we've got this thing level, then we're going to go ahead and reinstall those 3 screws. Now when we do this, we need to hold those threaded studs in place. So this is kind of hard to get to, but it can be done. I suppose you could have done this before you mounted it on the pedestal stand, but this is when I did it. So if your cutter head is too tall, then you're not going to be able to level these 2 tables. So you'll need to lower it before you level these 2 tables, but they should be perfectly level all the way across. So in particular, that far end of the rear table. So once we've got that tightened down and leveled, we're going to go ahead and apply paste wax to the table surfaces, and then we'll buff that off. And this is just going to help protect that surface from rusting. Next, we're going to level that cutting head. So you've got 2 tightened down screws that tighten down the bearing brackets, and then at the bottom of the bearing brackets is that leveling screw or adjustment screw that rests on the stud. So you loosen those 2 screws, and you need to do this for both sides, each one independently. And then adjust that bottom screw. And you'll see when we spin the head, if it moves that level, then it's hitting that level. So we want them to sit just below the level so that it's not touching it. Once you've got it set, then you can tighten those 2 screws in the bearing bracket back down. Now this is not the final adjustment to that cutting head. There will need to be one more adjustment after we install the blades, but we'll get to that later. So there we go. Next, installing the blades. So this was a bit of a mystery to me at first, but once I started playing around with it and understood why there were so many screws, it made sense. So these screws that we're installing first go in those cutouts there. These are leveling screws. These actually go flush into the cavity there, and the blade rests on the top of those screws. So if we need to raise or lower the blades to get everything square, we can raise and lower these screws while the blade is inside that channel to level it. But you'll have to loosen up the other screws that hold the blades in place as well. So I found it easier to stand on the side that I'm on now to be able to get these in. So I'll just speed up through all this. Obviously there's 3 blades, so there's a total of these 6 leveling screws. I'm just using a little bit of 3-in-1 oil to help those screws thread in there a little better on some of them. So now we're ready to install the blades. Pay very close attention to the orientation. Now I'm standing on the back side of the joiner, so the front is facing us. So you've got the cutter blade wedge, and it's got a little line cut out in it that faces towards the blade like that. And then obviously the blade needs to be oriented correctly. And then we're going to line them up with the back side of the cutting head drum where my thumb is. It's okay that they protrude towards the camera, but we want them level on the back side. And make sure that that blade is all the way down completely inside that groove that it sits in. And then we tighten these down. So that line that's cut out on the wedge is a chip breaker, and that's why it needs to be right next to the blade. And I think it is possible to install these backwards, so just make sure you're doing it like I'm showing you here, and you should be okay. So we're going to do this for all 3 blades. This first one, I've got to keep my hand on the drum the whole time, otherwise the weight of that blade and wedge want it to spin. You'll see once I let go of it, it spins right to the bottom. So another wedge, another blade. And we'll speed this up for these next 2. The process is exactly the same. Now what we need to do is check to see that those blades are level all the way across them. So I'm looking at the gap between the blade and the rear table. And sure enough, one of the blades was slightly canted, so having to pop out that wedge a little bit so that I can maneuver the blade, reseat it, and then tighten it back down. All right. So next we're going to install the woodruff key that goes on the shaft of the arbor, or the arbor itself, and that little keyway cutout. We'll tap it in there. The original one is still sitting on the table. I think it was something that somebody fabricated. This one is just one I bought off of Amazon, I think. And then we will install the tool pulley, and it's a tight fit to get on there. Now the side of that tool pulley that has where the set screw goes in is facing towards the joiner. because we want the pulley as far away from the joiner, or the sheave of the pulley, as far away from the joiner as possible. All right, so then we'll go ahead and install that set screw. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the motor. So I've just laid some 2x4s down there for it to rest on. And the motor mount has two pieces to it, or the column mount. You got this flat piece that sits directly against the motor mount, and then the curved piece that wraps around the other side of the column. We're not going to tighten it down here. We're just threading the nuts and washers on there. Then we'll go ahead and install the 1/4-inch square rotary key on the motor shaft and install the pulley for the motor. And this one, we're going to want the pulley oriented like it is where the set screw is on the outside. So we want to get that pulley as close as we can to the motor, about 1/8 of an inch off of the motor. It does not ride on those screws that you can see under it. It's above them. So if it's scraping anything, you need to back it off a little bit. Next, we'll install the belt guard mount. Or belt guard bracket, I think. Can't remember. But it has 2 set screws. And it just screws in place directly below the bearing bracket. And then it's got 1 screw in the bottom. And that's to hold the actual belt guard mount. Next, we'll install the V-belt, and I replaced the existing V-belt with a cogged V-belt. I like the cogged V-belts better. I think they track around the pulleys better, and they're quieter, in my opinion. And then we'll just hook the motor pulley on there, and that'll help hold up that motor while we tighten it down. Now keep in mind, because it's only lifting on one side of the motor is going to be slightly canted here. So when you go to tighten all this stuff down, you want to lift up on the far side of the motor so that you can get it as square as possible. And we want to make sure we have some tension on that belt, but not too much tension. If there's too much tension, it may stop the motor from running. So decent tension, but not loose. And here we are just adjusting the motor pulley so that it's in line with the tool pulley. So we backed it off the motor just a little bit. And then we'll put that set screw back in. Next, we'll install the belt guard mount. And it goes with the long bar or long part of it hanging down. And you just want to kind of center it between the pulley or the sides of the belts. And then test fit that guard to make sure that the belt and the pulleys are not going to rub on it. We'll tighten it in place. And then we'll install the belt guard. So it has some screws, 2 screws, 2 nuts, and 4 washers. And as you can see, the holes on the outside of the belt guard for those screws are elongated so that you can shift it and move it around if you need to. So you just want to center it on the pulleys and the belt as best as possible, and then tighten all of that down. Nothing too difficult here. And if you don't have a belt guard, then don't worry about this part. This is the only belt guard I've got out of all of my tools. You also wanted to make sure that belt guard does not stick up above the tables. So we're going to test run. There we go. And everything is running as it should. Next, we're going to install the power panel, and this is why I said it would have been easier to install this on the Pedestal tool base before we ever installed the joiner itself, because getting into that spot right there is a pain in the butt. It can be done. I obviously did it, but so this is held in place by 2 screws with a spring on that screw, and then a washer and a square nut. There we go. So next we'll go ahead and route the power cord for the motor. I like just wrapping them around the column, and then I'll put a zip tie on them. Then we'll route that up the column and plug it into the proper spot, the motor spot, on the back side of the power panel. Next, we're installing the sliding guard rod, and it has a nut on it and a washer on it, and that nut will jam up against the joiner once we've got it where we want it. There's your sliding guard on the fence, and we'll install the fence now. And I'm sorry I'm standing in probably the worst possible position here. The most important part is getting that fence onto the fence sliding bar that's on the right hand side there, but I got it on. Then you're going to go ahead and add this hardware to the sliding guard, and it gets 1 washer under it, and then it gets a washer on top, and then that knob on top. Like so. That's just to protect anything from falling towards those the cutting head if you move the fence towards the camera more. Next, I'm going to square up the fence, and I'm just using some 1, 2, 3 blocks here. And I didn't show it, but once you've got that fence square at a 90-degree angle, you want to go ahead and make any adjustments to the protractor that's on the back side of the fence, so that it is showing 0. That way you know that that is dialed in. And this is where I installed that second set screw for the hand wheel that I should have done before I ever finished assembling the joiner. So next we're going to verify the table and the table height. So at this point we're going to crank it up to its first setting, and then we're going to take a measurement, and we should be at 1/8 of an inch, which we are. So now we'll just run it through each one of those other settings. And the final setting, I believe, is 1/2 inch. Once all that checks out, then we're just going to do another power test. This time we're going to power up the power panel itself. And there we go. We'll go ahead and turn that off. We are good to hook. So we need to lower that cutting head, and I didn't film it, but you need to lower that cutting head because right now those blades are protruding above the table. So they need to be just above the table, just like a 1/16 of an inch above the table. And the last thing we've got to install is the swinging guard. We just stick it in there like so. Make sure it's working. Perfect. So we started with this. Pretty rusty, pretty dusty. Lots of stuff inside that motor. Lots of stuff on the inside of the joiner. And this is the longest series I've done, I think, with 15 videos. But, you know, we did what we needed to do, and we now have a lovely joiner that looks great, runs great, and I'm sure it's going to join wood just fine. So that's going to wrap up this series. I enjoyed working on this. It was something different. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Be sure to check out that Reddit subreddit that I started. I think I'm the only person that's posted anything on there, so there's not a whole lot there. But get on there, ask some questions, do what you need to do. And I'm not sure what the next series is going to be, but we'll figure it out. And as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.